Oh, hi. Welcome to Crying in the Book Club, the hit new podcast where three emotional friends talk about comics books that make them emotional. I'm
I'm not
Alex.
emotional.
And I am emotional. That's Jean-Luc you heard there. I like it. So we came together, a little show called the Comics Podcast originally. 284 episodes. We were all on it. There were like 3 foiled assassination attempts by a former co-host who's not on this show, I will say. We figured that out after the third one. We're like, you know what? We're not going to have him on. But I'm glad the interrupting's here because that was a staple of the Comics
Oh yeah,
Podcast.
I kept the best bit from the Comics Podcast, which is interrupting the host in the middle of the intro.
And
I'm happy to be here to replace Chad.
That's Emily. Yeah,
Wow.
it's funny because Jean-Luc was the host who was always getting interrupted, and now he's first episode interrupted. So wow,
This is
What a-
Jean-Luc's revenge.
what a start. But
Yeah, my revenge against someone not on this show, but
yeah, who you have no ill things towards other than
hand in unlovable hands.
So this is our karaoke podcast.
Cut that. We're not keeping that in.
We're not cutting anything. That's how we flow on this show. But this is our first episode of Crying in the Book Club, and a bit more, I guess, about us. I'm Alex. I used to be a video game journalist before I was set free, but I wasn't completely set free because now I'm doing like video game PR. So it's like, he's free, but
Sounds worse.
still in a cage. Yeah, I play less games, which is actually good. But yeah, and you heard the voice of Jean-Luc.
Jean-Luc, who are you?
I don't know. I'm a guy with a podcast, much like all the other 20-something guys with podcasts. I don't know.
It's cool you can say that again. Because like,
it is
for
cool
a
I
few
can
months
say
you
that
couldn't.
again.
Yeah, and that made you sad.
But I'm one of the few guys with podcasts that's read Watchmen upwards of 10 times, so makes me uniquely qualified for
No, you will get to that for sure.
for this show.
Wow, what a spoiler! I guess if they read the title.
Yeah.
I love when podcast hosts are like, "Oh, wait, they're gonna read the title." Damn! So we did that. We checked that off. Very
Yeah.
exciting. Emily, what's up with you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm also a podcaster, I guess, to introduce me. And I'm friends with the two of you, and I'm excited to. I'm excited to be talking to you
sure
again.
about that.
I'm friends with you.
I know I didn't sound very sure about that, but I'm excited to be talking to you again because I have missed the two of you so dearly, even though we do technically talk online sometimes. It's just it's not the same.
As 2.5 years of COVID have shown.
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
the same.
Times are a changing. So
So we're gonna talk about Watchmen. What's Watchmen? Alex, what's Watchmen?
who cares what Watchmen is? You know what?
No,
Watchmen
I
sucks.
care. Every episode could be a person's first episode. What's
true.
Watchmen?
Well, before we get to that, I just want to say, like, we wanted to do this show because we were sick of reading the weekly comics, the monthly comics, and we're
That's
like, you know what?
true.
We're burnt out. It's been 284 episodes. Like, we've read probably upwards of 100 issues of Batman. Way more than that, probably.
So many.
Kind of sad to say in the iterations. But it's like, hey, what if
So many.
I didn't partake in that for the most part, so
yeah, me and
but
old Chadley.
so many.
Too many. I'm happier now. But we thought, hey, like, why don't we do actual like full stories in graphic novel format, which we did a bit. We did some book club episodes, but this whole show is going to be like, hey, read Watchmen for the show. That's all you got to do. You don't have to read Doomsday Clock, watch the TV show, watch the movies, read before Watchmen, but you can, and some of us did. But yeah, Watchmen. How can you not start on Watchmen when you're doing a comic show? Because it's like, widely considered to be the greatest graphic novel of all time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've definitely heard that before.
So some might say that. Some might say such things. Yeah,
we might say it later. Who knows? But
some people might believe this. Yes.
If I if I just wanted to kickstart some discussion here, I wrote in our notes that didn't Watchmen kind of contribute to the existence of the term graphic novel to
Yeah.
begin with?
Do you want a history lesson? I didn't really.
I mean, I don't actually have I don't have like a
Yeah.
history lesson.
No,
It's just like
I actually think it's useful to like situate Watchmen in the context that it came out in,
Yeah.
because it has been so diluted, much to some purists' chagrin,
yeah.
in the years since by, some fucking hack directors of film and television,
Well,
and some of the
we'll get
worst
there.
comic book writers to operate
But
in the modern era. But uh, go ahead.
I think that it's interesting, like graphic novel is sort of a ubiquitous term, especially in 2022 as we exist right now, but like that was not always a term applied to comics, and like the advent of these like stories that could just sort of be like wrapped up by a single story designation really impacted like the use of the term graphic novel,
Oh yeah.
and Watchmen was one
Mhm.
of these.
I mean, there's really two, and it's Watchmen and it's the Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns,
Released in the
Yeah,
which
same
came
year.
out same year.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, if you were to actually go back, you would probably find that the Dark Knight Returns is actually the originator of that, like the originator of that term.
Yeah.
Um,
But
but
when we tend to think of graphic novels, we tend to think of like stuff that's not necessarily, I mean, like this might seem kind of funny to say in terms of Watchmen, but like stuff that's not cape comics, you tend to think of like
yeah,
more
well now you
independent,
do.
you tend to think of more independent work. And
Sure.
even though Watchmen is technically like a DC comic, like for a long time it was more considered like a an independent like w- franchise
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, well, yeah, and so the reason for like the story that gets to Watchmen is I actually think a kind of interesting one. It
Yeah.
stems from like basically in the early to mid 1980s, like superhero comic books, as had been in the zeitgeist,
Yeah.
were sort of starting to fall out of favor. Like sales were dropping at DC, and at Marvel, but as tends to be the case, like DC always gets hit harder than Marvel does when it comes to sales drops. Um, and so they were like the editors at DC were sort of looking for a new market of people, a new demographic of people to sell comic books to. And really, this trend kicks off a couple years earlier with a different Alan Moore comic, which is Saga of the Swamp Thing, um,
Yeah, that tracks.
which they, yeah, which really kicks off their quote unquote entrance into the quote unquote adult market, if you want to call it that, um, because they stopped submitting Saga of the Swamp Thing to the Comics Code Authority. So it stopped as I
And
think for a comic book like that, would not have been approved by the Comics Code
yeah,
Authority.
the Comics Code Authority is its own entire
Yeah,
podcast episode.
but yeah, it really is. But as such, you couldn't really sell Saga of the Swamp Thing to children because it wasn't approved by the Comics Code Authority. And Saga of the Swamp Thing was like beloved, and is still beloved, and is it
Pretty good.
is a phenomenal. It's a phenomenal piece of work. I love Saga of the Swamp Thing. I think its stature in comics history is like totally warranted.
Hmm.
And then it came, in 1985 with they wanted to start, really intentionally appealing to the adult market, with books like The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, which were these sort of reimaginations of, you know, what the horizons of Cape Comics could be. And it, you know, it's interesting. There's a quote from Watchmen artist Dave Gibbons where he talks about, and this was as Watchmen was coming out, how he and Moore viewed Watchmen not as something that, you know, should be a template for like all comics in the future, but just, you know, this is, you know, we can expand superheroes beyond the golly gosh gee whiz. I mean, this
Yeah.
is coming out of the gold, silver, and bronze age. I mean, this is contemporary with a number of other books that, you know, still had that tone to them. I mean,
And like
Wolfman and
Watchmen.
Perez's Titans was coming out at this time, and that was, you know, for as acclaimed as that is, it is still, you know, it's very golly gee Buster. You know,
Yeah.
it's that.
Well,
It's
I
like
mean,
golly-
Watchmen was supposed to be actual, like, Cape Comics characters.
Initially it was supposed to be, oh god, and Alex, do you remember
the Charlton folks.
Charlton
Yeah,
characters?
so you got like the Blue
Yeah.
Beetle, the you know, like all those
Question,
Captain
Adam.
Yeah.
and then
You can
DC.
see the very obvious, you know,
Oh yeah,
Yeah, like,
remnants of
it's
those characters.
barely
Like,
disguised.
DC said you can't use these characters, but they didn't say you couldn't rip them off. And Alan Moore's like, sick, awesome,
So
let's do
it's
it.
actually what's interesting about that story, and I found this out while I was doing some, you know, research for this episode, is that it wasn't so much like, you know, a DC mandate that like they didn't want those characters to be used in that
Mhm.
way. It
Yeah.
was specifically the Watchmen editor had come over from Charlton Comics and had like worked on those characters and overseen those characters and had a soft spot for them, and didn't want them to
Oh.
be involved in like a murder mystery that painted the Question as a right-wing
Oh, I
fanatic
see.
that could then, you know, never be used again.
Yeah, yeah. Which,
Okay.
you know what?
The
That's
thing at the
that's
time.
fair. That's very
Uh,
fair too.
um,
It's funny too because like I was reading I think it's like the deluxe edition, but it has like an Alan Moore, you know, essay at the end, and he talks about how he was also just like fed up with continuity in comics and how like, oh god, if we want to use Superman, we got to talk to the Superman editor, and it can't be at the same time as this guy's using it. So he
Yeah.
wanted to
Mm.
like take over a full continuity that he could do whatever he wanted with all the characters in it and just like create that, which I think Watchmen's really cool because it really does create this world in 12 issues that feels like a full like DC universe with like,
Mhm.
you know, stories that happened before, stories that are, you know, happening after, and all these cool characters and stuff, which is, you know, why so many shitty things came out before and after that other people, not Alan Moore, did, because there was so much potential in those things in the stories that were going. But we didn't really say it, but it was released over 12 issues
Yeah.
from 1986 to 1987, and it is. I think its claim to fame, the thing that I heard about it first was it's one of Time Magazine's 100 best novels, and that was a big
Ooh.
thing, and is a big thing, I guess, because it's
Yeah.
like,
It's kind of like the go-to example for the idea that graphic novels can be as profound as like just written word novels.
yeah. Yeah, and I think it's less impactful. Like, I think 15 years ago, it was way more impactful, where it's like, hey, take our comics seriously. They're really good. And I think now, like, the thing has sort of changed where people aren't like, yo, Watchmen, it's really good, because there's so many things out there now that people can point to and things.
Yeah.
And not that there wasn't great stuff then, too, but I remember that being a big deal.
Well, the cultural zeitgeist has changed. Like, at the point that we're in now, like, comic book inspired movies are the most popular movies in popular culture. Like, you
Yeah.
don't have to convince people that reading a comic book can be worth their while.
Well,
okay, I say that, but
people are happy to go see Marvel movies and way less happy to go, you know, buy a Hawkeye trade.
that's also
afterwards,
true.
you know?
And I'm willing to admit that that statement I made was a bit shooting from the hip and not entirely encompassing of what I meant.
I will say, though, to your point about the zeitgeist, I mean, Watchmen really changed the zeitgeist, right? Like,
Mhm.
it is you can trace a direct line from, you know, virtually DC Comics' entire current line
Mhm.
and their entire current line for the last 2 decades
Well,
back
Yeah.
back to Watchmen.
I
And,
mean,
and
but
not in the sense that like they tried to let Tom King write a Rorschach miniseries. I mean like literally
Oh, I forgot
tonally
about that.
what the horizons of like superhero characters could be, because what made I think Alan Moore so compelling as a writer coming into, and not to talk up Alan Moore too much, because there were certainly a lot of great comic book writers that came before Alan Moore that were contemporaries with Alan Moore. um but Alan Moore and I have to hand it to Frank Miller in this case, but Alan Moore and Frank Miller really blew the doors off at Marvel and DC in terms of
mhm.
expanding what comics could be. And
Mhm.
Alan Moore in particular uh, did so by taking the iconography of the superhero in Watchmen and completely reinventing what that could be, because up to this point you had it's this classic struggle between good versus evil, and then you
Yeah.
had the sort of like Stan Lee Marvel model that was very popular of like it's good versus evil, but these characters are real people. They don't really have like full internal struggles, but they have interpersonal conflicts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
A lot of the conflicts are divorced from them. It's not it's not the conflict isn't necessarily Spider-Man fighting Green Goblin. It's
Yeah.
can Spider-Man pay his rent? But at the end of the day, it's still this diametric sort of the conflict is still diametric. These
Yeah.
characters don't have full interiority.
And I think
And we'll get to this, I'm sure, when we sort of start
oh
talking
yeah,
about the
yeah.
plot and the issues
Yeah.
and the characters. But there is an interiority to the cast of Watchmen, and almost more importantly to the world of Watchmen, that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons put together for
Mhm.
this
I would give
for
some
this book.
credit to what Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams did with their Green Lantern, Green Arrow one, and not in the same way, because that was still like it was a groundbreaking thing at the time, where like, hey, they're like going around America and dealing with like issues like racism and stuff like that, and it's not necessarily like, hey, you can't like punch racism in the face, right? It's not like a thing. It's like it added a bit of more like gray area and like realness to
Yeah.
it, but it was still like a, I wouldn't say a campy comic, but like compared to Watchmen.
Yeah, and I try to foreground all of this by saying that I don't mean to take away anything from creators that came before. I don't pretend that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons invented good superhero
Yeah.
comics, but they certainly they
Perfected it.
really they, okay, I'm not saying that, but they certainly
I am.
they did really change what it was a paradigm shift. I mean,
Mhm.
I can't necessarily speak specifically to the Denny O'Neil Green Arrow Green Lantern run, because I haven't read it, but my impression of that has always been that it is
Oh, but
still.
we will,
Oh, but
because it's on our list.
We've
we'll
been
be getting to
renewed.
that one.
Wow.
But my impression of that is still and this could be we'll see. I may be totally wrong, but when I think of that run, I just think of the cover of Speedy shooting up on the cover, and Green Arrow with his hands on his head, with an exaggerated gasp on his face, like, how could you be doing heroin or speed or speeding on speed?
Speed on
Yeah,
speed.
because
If they
it's
didn't do that, they should have. Like
Oh my
DC editors,
god.
come on, call us.
yeah. But
But
I
anyway,
guess I'm really only familiar with that run of comics from the fact that we were going to do them for the show.
yeah.
So,
But and I think the thing is that like Watchmen was obviously so impactful, and we'll talk about the positives and the many negatives of people different interpretations of what made Watchmen so great and sort of the lessons taken from that. But first, I'm gonna give a little summary of it. Sort of
yeah,
what's going
high
into
level.
it.
Let's do a high
yeah.
level summary of
Yeah.
the Watchmen.
What's that Watchmen thing about? It takes place in an alternate history where
Thank
superheroes
God.
emerged in the 1940s, which is the same time as the golden age of comics, and 1960s. So there were two big, superhero things, which is the golden and silver age, which is a nice meta thing. But
Mhm.
and their presence changed history. So the U.S. actually won the Vietnam War, and the Watergate scandal never happened. So it's 1985, and the U.S. is edging towards World War III with the Soviet Union mostly, and superheroes have been outlawed. Those that remain, like the comedian, work for the government, or like the vigilante Rorschach, exist on their own. And like many good stories, Watchmen begins with a murder and ends with a whole lot more murder. So, yeah, it's we've talked about it. Commonly
Is it
referred
murder
to.
though?
Well,
Yes,
is it? Well, did they want to be? Like, anyway, I'm not
technically,
answering that question.
yes.
So it's commonly referred as one of the greatest graphic novels of all time. But Emily, what was your first experience with Watchmen?
Oh, this is it's interesting that I'm the first person to be put on the spot here. Okay, so my first
We're going in
experience.
descending age order, so
Wait, we're going in age
yeah,
order? Okay, yeah, I
yeah.
am the oldest.
Chad goes first.
Oh.
Our first cry space is
Shut
here.
the fuck up, Jean-Luc.
That was me, Chad. But
No, I know, but I don't have a shut the fuck up Alex. I didn't anticipate that, so I didn't ask him to record that.
Oh, well, always nice to have you on, Chad. But oh, you're walking out. Okay, all right.
My first experience with Watchmen. Okay, so I, as a young person, went to an academic summer camp at the University of Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee.
This story
And
already owns so hard.
as a part of this summer camp, a class that I took one year was adaptations of comic books. And so for this class, I had to read and also watch. I had to read the book Watchmen, the comic book Watchmen, and then watch the movie. And I was like, God, I was probably like 14. I was a fucking idiot. Like
Jesus.
it was really like it was really dumb that I was reading this book at this age and like being put in a position to like try to make sense of this. And actually I don't even remember if the Watchmen movie was out at that time. Maybe it was. Maybe it had just come out and that's how we watched it. But like I reading Watchmen now, I mean we'll get into this more, but reading Watchmen now, I understood so many things more than I did when I attempted to read it the first time. And
Sure.
I liked Watchmen when I read it as a wee child. I still liked it, but in a much different way.
Is this the first time you've revisited it?
Yeah.
Whoa, wow, okay.
That's good.
I just had never like I don't know, like I figure, it's Watchmen. It's one of those like
Yeah, I mean,
it's one of those titans of the comic industry. Like there's so many other things that I need to read that I never thought
like Batman
yeah,
Hush.
you're not a sicko like some people on this podcast.
I never considered like maybe I should revisit this and
No, that's fair.
I'm excited to get into the experience of revisiting. I want to hear about you guys though.
Jean-Luc, this is I mean, you've read it like 10 times, but what was your first indoctrination into
For the
Watchmen?
record, Alex is older than me, so technically he should be going
Wait,
next.
is he really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Alex is like a full year older than me.
Okay.
I'm the baby.
Yeah, we were born on the same day actually, but a year apart.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
we're
part's
twins.
You're Irish twins.
Well, Alex is Irish.
That's a slander.
That's a compliment.
Okay.
I read I don't know how old I was when I read Watchmen for the first time. It was definitely before I was like reading comics, so I was younger than 13. I think I would have been 11 or 12 when I read it for the first time.
Wow.
That is very similar to mine.
Because I think my mom is an English teacher, and she had brought it home from we were on summer vacation, and she'd brought it home from the public library, and it had been sitting out, and I just read it, because it was sitting in the living room, and I was wont to just read stuff
That's amazing.
when I was that age. And so I read it not really knowing any of the like with no preconceived notions about like what it was. Um and had no idea what I read. But read the whole thing, did not really understand what happened, didn't get any of the references. I was like, Woodward and Bernstein were killed in a car crash. Who the fuck are Woodward and Bernstein?
Are those bears who have those adventures? Oh,
um,
golly.
so I was like, I don't know, that was whatever. I don't know. I read that. I don't get it. And I came back to it, of course,
Yeah.
years later after I think it was a year later, the next summer vacation, I watched the movie with my parents, which was really awkward. Well, it was fine. One scene in particular was really awkward.
And it's a slow-mo scene. There's
only
so much
one?
slow-mo in that film. Oh my god. I watched it today.
There was only one that I would say was like really rough to watch with my parents. Well, that I remember.
I mean,
I haven't.
There's at least 2 scenes of like heterosexual coitus, but
The
one
in
is
the ship is definitely more.
one is
Yeah.
more significant than the other.
Yeah, the Hallelujah one is the one that I'm thinking of.
Yeah. And John-Luke can't listen to Leonard Cohen anymore. So
I listen to Leonard Cohen fairly frequently.
oh my.
But yeah, and actually it's funny because the movie is so stupid that it actually allowed my stupid brain to understand like the plot of Watchmen.
No, actually, you're no 100%. I am right with you. Like,
yeah. I mean, I was 12 or 13 though. Like,
yeah, and I mean, I would have been like, I don't know, probably 15. Like, I feel like we were at the prime age to absorb the Watchmen movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched it today
I didn't
for
really
the first time.
like it necessarily.
I mean, I don't know that I liked it, but I thought it was okay. I have a different feeling now.
I honestly don't remember. I couldn't honestly tell you what I thought about it because both of my parents, after it ended, I think both of them said something along the lines of, "That is one of the stupidest things I've ever seen." And of course, being 12 or 13 at the time, I absorbed what my parents said as.
Wait,
as
so that's why you hate the Watchmen movie? Oh, okay. Because me and Emily were messaging. We both watched it today. We're like, "It's really good."
Yeah, that's exactly what we said.
How does that happen? But my first experience with Watchmen is similar to Jean-Luc, where I guess Emily too, where I read it way too young, like way too young. It must have been like 11 or 12, and I was reading my Star Wars omnibuses, right? They're omnibuses, but I like saying omnibuses.
Omnibuy.
But yeah, and I guess it jumped out. It had had blood on the cover a little bit.
It's got a reputation. I don't know if that impacted either.
I don't think I knew the reputation. I could barely read when I was 11. Like
I thought superheroes were for stupid little babies. I had no idea what
that
the reputation was.
Absolutely tracks with like all of my knowledge of you, Jean-Luc.
but I got it.
I no longer believe that, but at the time when I was 11, I definitely believed that.
Jean-Luc likes Batman.
No, I can 100% see you as a very pretentious child.
Yeah.
If we had a time machine, we'd check it out. But yeah, I just remember like my parents bought it for me. I guess they didn't look at the book. They're like, oh, it's a comic book. Those are for kids.
That's very funny.
Little did they know that it was one of Time Magazine's 100 best novels and could go places.
You got an early head start on Time Magazine's 100 best novels.
And I think it's the only one I've read. So
my copy came from the class that I took, like, because my parents paid for like the summer camp and the class.
Sure.
Like the books were included, so like I got like a big like graphic novel edition of Watchmen.
Mm-hmm. So we all inadvertently got introduced to Watchmen because of our parents.
Yeah. I remember key scenes that stick with me, and it was like
I remembered stuff reading it back for this. Like there were scenes that I like remembered reading, but just with like new context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, I skipped all the prose. I skipped all of the novels.
Oh,
I even skipped that
me
damn
t-
like
me
when the
too,
comic was
dude.
going on at the same time. My small brain could not fathom that.
Oh,
It's like,
me
wait,
too,
left,
dude.
Oh,
right,
the
left,
Black Freighter
right.
shit confused me. I read it all, but it confused me so much. That's like that is like probably the like thing that is at the front of my mind when I think about reading Watchmen for the first time, is that I was like, I had no idea that like a character in the comic was reading the Black Freighter, and I remember getting to the end and being like, "Wait, so what happened with the Black?" Because I was like, "Oh, this is gonna." I had thought like, "Oh, this is gonna like the Black Freighter is coming. It's a literal thing. It's coming." And so the way that I like explained it to myself at the end was that the giant tentacle monster. Oh, that was the Black
That
Freighter.
was the Wow. Well, that's even cooler. Take notes, Alan Moore.
You you thought that the
Yeah,
tentacle monster was the
With
Black Freighter?
yeah,
yeah.
that makes
I'm gonna
sense.
go find that on E621.
No,
Yeah,
you do that.
That's my last Chad sound effect. I'm sorry to say.
Thank you, Chad, for recording those. Those were great. Also, honestly, like that, those are two very things that Chad would say. So there we go. And he said them. But I just remember like I just remember like the scene. I think at the scene where Rorschach gets like obliterated, and then like the like nudity throughout it was something that I was like, oh my god, I can't be reading this. But I read it, and I think I read it once, and then I think I read it one more time. Maybe I didn't, but I was like, oh god, I can't be reading this. And I turned it into my parents. I was like, guys, this book that you guys bought for me, it's not okay. Time Magazine, they
Alex.
call it one of its best novels, but I don't think you guys would approve. And then I never saw that copy
Alex.
again.
Oh wow.
Oh, you
Yeah.
precious baby.
So I got a new copy of Watchmen that I got a few years ago.
Alex.
That's funny.
And then like rereading it now again, like the black, like it was, I had read it again since then, but this time I really took it slow with the prose and the Black Freighter. And the first time I read it too, I was like, man, this Rorschach guy's so cool. He's so great. Oh my gosh. Oh, well, he died at the end. That was pretty sad. And I think that was like what like, you know, Zack Snyder's experience was, where he like read it as like a kid.
Yeah.
And then like went into it. And this time it's, I mean, and the previous times it was really nice to read this book. And for me, it really holds up as one of the greatest graphic novels of all time.
Yeah, honestly, like I didn't expect this book to hold up as well as it did rereading it. Like, you know, I guess
You gotta have faith in my taste sometimes.
well, I just, you
Coheed
know,
and Cambria comic.
when
I
it
don't like those.
when it comes to comics, a lot of things that when you go back and reread them, they don't necessarily hold up. And so I wasn't 100% sure how I was gonna feel about Watchmen rereading it. But honestly, like, even like there's obviously stuff that doesn't hold up because it's a comic that was written like forever ago. Like the like social mores have changed like drastically even within the past 10 years, much less the past 50 years. So like, but still, rereading Watchmen, like it's still so good.
Well,
Like,
I mean, it's fascinating how prescient the book actually ends up being, like,
yeah,
politically.
yeah,
Hey Russia, what are you doing over there?
yeah.
I don't know how much we want to, you know, just dive into that right off the bat, but I mean, there's I don't even know where to begin with it, quite frankly. The thing that like really clicked for me this reading, um this is the great thing about Watchmen, is that something new I feel like every time I read it, some new thematic little thing or some little nugget in there clicks into place for me. But the thing that really got me this time was the way that it handles conspiracy and you know, conspiracy theories and, you know, the spread of conspiracy theories, but also the ways that they're totally like disenfranchised, because throughout the whole comic, Rorschach basically every other issue, Rorschach goes to the newsstand to pick up his new issue of the New Frontiersman.
Mm-hmm.
And the New Frontiersman is, I mean, it's for all intents and purposes, it's a print media version of Breitbart or Storm Front or
Yeah.
whatever
news.
like insane right wing publication. But the thing that hit me is that when you read, and there's at the end of every issue, there's some sort of like in universe piece of prose that's included, and one of them is a couple articles that are excerpts from an issue of the New Frontiersman.
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
In which the New Frontiersman is actually right that the disappearance of all of these like artists and scientists is actually like they're actually connected, and yeah, they are actually they're connected, and they're connected in a malevolent way that is going to be turned on humanity in a really brutal fashion. Of course, they're being siphoned away by Ozymandias to contribute to building the massive tentacle creature that he uses to kill half the population of New York City at the end of the comic. And the New Frontiersman is totally right about that. Like they're right about it, but coming at it from such an insane angle.
Yeah.
And this is true of Rorschach as well, where he is a dumb motherfucker, but because he is so stupid and single-minded, he acts it's like the broken clock is right twice a day. He like ends up being half right on not the whole like Cape conspiracy is he's so tunnel vision on one thing that he can't see the bigger picture. But this is the way that a lot of conspiracy theories, everything from the JFK assassination, which there's a lot of throwaway lines about, yeah, it's weird that Nixon was in Dallas on the day of the JFK assassination, which, by the way, that's a real fact. He was there. No one knows why.
Well, I mean, the Watchmen movie absolutely 100% attributes the JFK assassination to the comedian.
Oh, so does the book. I mean, there's that scene, I think, in issue 9 or 10.
The book alludes to it, but like the movie shows it.
Oh, the movie. There's like
he's smiling and smoking.
Yeah, like he's literally there.
Yeah, but it is basically it's or not even basically it is in the text of the book.
Yeah, like the movie is not expounding upon much.
Yeah. But yeah, like just the way that that is a tool that is often used as like, oh well, you have to be an insane crank to believe these conspiracy theories, and it's sort of used to malign people and push them to the edges, and in the way that like people like Rorschach and Rorschach, for all his failings, like is a person, and interestingly, Rorschach is the closest in terms of his characterization to a traditional superhero, in terms of like he sees the world entirely in black and white. He never compromises. He there's no room for any kind of morality that isn't good or evil in his mind, which is it's so funny to me every time I read this book now that is like that's Superman, like from like the sort of inverted in a way, certainly, but from a characterization standpoint, like the closest this book has to a Superman is Rorschach.
Well, that's kind of the interesting thing about this book, is that like they have taken these iconic superheroes and like sort of split them into different facets. Like Batman is clearly like, there is an element of Batman that is Night Owl, but there is also the element of Batman that is Rorschach. And Superman, like, you can draw arrows between like Ozymandias and
Dr.
Manhattan.
Yeah. I mean, Dr. Manhattan is a Captain Atom ripoff, and Captain Atom is a Superman ripoff.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's those, the traditional superhero archetypes are definitely here. It's just that you really have a sense for, these characters have interiority in a way
Yeah.
that, Batman or
Yeah.
Superman at the time, and this is less still true, but to a lesser degree
Yeah.
today. But they like Night Owl. There's so much more to Night Owl. Is like he is a person who, I mean, he's an incredibly weak person, an incredibly depressed person who, gets his rocks off on feeling powerful, and ever since he stopped being Night Owl, he feels like a weak shadow of the man that he used to be. The only way, like literally, and this is one of the cornier elements of Watchmen, but literally the only way he can get his dick hard is to put the Night Owl costume on. Which
Well, I mean,
it works for the character, but and like all the characters have that, where they have a lot, like there's so much internal conflict to the
yeah,
characters of
like,
Watchmen.
I mean, what was so transgressive about Watchmen at the time was taking these archetypes of characters and treating them like real people.
Yeah, because like superheroes are.
I mean, that's what Garth Ennis would do to even more of an extreme later on with the
Yeah,
boys. He
and
said
much
he saw Watchmen and said, "What if that?" But more.
and
but
much
but
worse.
also like but also not grounded in the way that Watchmen is grounded, because
Oh, absolutely.
Watchmen is such a compelling alternate history, because Alan Moore looks at it and goes, well, what if Superman was real?
It's just
And
better.
and the result of what if Superman was real is that you essentially have an even stronger American empire that can crush everything in its path.
Until
And
Superman leaves, right? Like until he's gone.
until the detente is gone,
And
Yeah.
how can
and and
how,
that
how can
doesn't
you hold
maintain,
sway
can't be
over a
maintained.
Superman in real life? Like,
Yeah.
how can you make sure he does that? And it's like on a meta level, it's just such a loving. I mean, I would say loving look at like comic books and superheroes and all that kind of stuff. Where like even in here, it's like, oh well, the masks came out in the 40s and the 60s. And it's like, oh, it's the golden age, that's the silver age, and it's like all these characters, all this rich history, and it just going back to what Alan Moore said about like he wanted to create his own comic book continuity that he didn't have to worry about, and the amount of like character he gives to people like Night Owl, like Ozymandias, like
Mhm.
basically every character and every side character in this book. It's astounding, and it's like he does it in 12 issues. Him and Dave Gibbons.
It's a
Yeah.
truly fully realized world. Like,
Yeah.
when you leave Watchmen, you do feel like you have left like a fully developed existence.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, everything down to like, oh, they can use electric cars because, Dr. Manhattan can just conjure up lithium.
Yeah.
It's like
Mhm.
just everything like that. And to Alex's point, which I think is a really compelling one. I mean, if there's one thing about like Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, is that it's that they fucking love this shit. Like
yeah.
they love both of those guys they're guys who like love superhero comics. And I mean, that is really the tragedy of Alan Moore, almost, not to go too far astray from Watchmen, but is that like
Mhm.
he's a guy who like it was the thing that he loved the most, and the industry absolutely spat in his face and destroyed him
I feel like
for it.
I feel like that's extremely relevant
Yeah.
to like
Yeah, I
Watchmen
mean,
and the existence of Watchmen.
yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, the thing is, they hadn't spat in his face at this point yet. At
No,
this
no.
point, it was
Sure.
this is like but what they said about it at the time is really interesting. There's a quote from Dave Gibbons at the time where he said that he never wanted Watchmen to like narrow what comics could be. It was to go back to the like thing that we talked about at the beginning. It was always to broaden comics, to bring comics to a new audience, not to
Mhm.
do this. What ended up happening was was that it was a paradigm shift, and that comics are now a thing that they weren't before, tonally and
Yeah.
You can
in
have
terms of their
extreme
subject
violence.
matter.
You can have you can show like human genitalia. You can like
Right.
you can do that.
And yeah, and I mean, even aside from like those sort of like higher level things, like the intent behind Watchmen was never to be like, all superhero comics should be these like complex character studies
Yeah.
with that are morally gray. It's more that, superhero comics can be this, and in some cases should
Exactly.
be this, but we shouldn't that shouldn't be all that we do with superhero
And
comics.
I don't want to
Exactly.
I don't want to dumb it down to being like, oh, it's connected to DC and Marvel, but it's like it's basically Watchmen is like a, hey, what if superheroes were in the real world?
I
It's
Yeah.
mean,
it's a
that's
tale. There you
literally what
go.
it. I mean, that was
It
Yeah.
literally
is.
the starting point.
Yeah.
Was when Alan Moore wrote his first script, or started working on his first script for using the Charleston characters, like, or
Mhm.
Charlton characters, like, that's what it was. It was, what if these characters existed in
Yeah.
a world that was more akin to ours,
Yeah.
and what would the real ramifications of those be? Because of course,
Yeah.
you can have a book where Superman exists and everything history unfolds exactly the same way, and
Yeah.
Superman exists in that world, and that's
And
literally the only thing that's different, and
and you
that's
need to
that's
have a love.
fine. But
You need to have a love for like, golden and silver age superheroes and like that concept to like even to be able to make this. Like the amount of like nuance and stuff that's in it is people who like, you know what, we love superheroes, we know them, and this is like us bringing it to the real world.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and to
But
understand, like, to like treat them with the sort of seriousness that it would
mhm,
take to, do the level of analysis that's required to be like,
yeah,
to think about them in a way that is beyond the sort of like pulp stories. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
that does demonstrate a real love for them, and it's no like, you know it's no surprise then that like some of the people that would come after Alan Moore, that were inspired by Alan Moore, would be people in that who are in that same vein. The Neil
yeah.
Gaiman. I mean, Neil Gaiman literally consulted on Watchmen. Well,
Yeah.
consulted is a strong word. He answered questions when Alan Moore called him up to have chats about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, he was involved. He was involved in the creation of Watchmen,
Mhm.
and none of his comics would have been possible if it weren't for
Yeah.
Watchmen.
And just breaking
Absolutely.
down
People
that
like,
door
mhm.
as well for like the whole British invasion of comics. It's
Exactly, yeah,
it's more
yeah.
it's all those people.
I mean,
So
there's a reason that people think of the modern age of comics starting the same year that Watchmen came out.
yeah, so like the book is basically not to again dull it down into one thing, but it's a whodunit. It's a murder mystery. The
Yeah.
It
comedian
is.
is murdered on the first page, and the rest of the book is basically, hey, who did it? With a lot of other stuff that's very very captivating. But
Yeah.
as a murder mystery, Emily, how do you think it did? Did you? I mean, you read it earlier, so like thing, but did you know who did it? Was it like how was that sort of experience?
Well, I mean, when I read it the first time, okay, so admission of guilt time. I didn't read 100% of Watchmen the first time I was supposed to read it. I am historically a very bad student, and this even spilled over into an academic summer camp that I was not technically being graded on. But so I didn't actually 100% finish Watchmen. Like, I knew what happened, but I hadn't like I got pretty far. Like, I feel like I remember the last page that I read back then was like the like page when Rorschach is leaving Adrian's like leaving Ozymandias's lair, and Dr. Manhattan like blows him up. Like, I was like very close to the full end of the comic. I just like for whatever reason did not actually finish it. So like I knew what happened, but reading it this time was the first time that I fully like read through the whole comic like start to
Mhm.
finish. And I mean, like, I knew what happened, but I still enjoyed the murder mystery aspect of it. Like, I still enjoyed like the trying to figure out like what all of the machinations were behind what was happening. Like,
Mhm.
cuz you know that certain characters have certain parts of it figured out, but nobody has the full picture because like I mean nobody's Ozymandias. Like nobody's in there until they hack into his computer. But I enjoyed it. I didn't expect this comic to hold up as much as it did on reread, and I like had a really good time.
Heck yeah.
And I have to be honest, it's not really. I don't think it's dumbing it down at all to call Watchmen a murder mystery, because
No.
structurally, it is a noir detective story. Really, I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, like, each issue sort of focuses on a different character as its like point of view character, but Rorsch, the running through line is Rorschach investigating the death of the comedian, and
Mhm.
Mhm.
everything really, like, no matter how tertiary the flashback may seem, like, is in service of, giving the reader, if not, Rorschach himself,
Mhm.
Yeah.
the necessary information to set up for, the grand reveal at the end, right?
And
I
it's
mean,
it's
it's
interesting though, because it's
because it's
like, sorry, it is it's this murder mystery, but the reason I guess I said that or felt like that is that like there's so much substance around it though. Like the world is so alive, and it's just like ridiculous how well everything else is going, and how engaging everything is. Even just like the lives of the people around them, like on the street, and the newspaper guy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I love the interstitials with the the newspaper guy running the newspaper stand, just because of the way that those sort of change as the world changes, and the way that, like, he continuously tries to, like, rationalize the impending end of the world in, like, a nuclear apocalypse, as, the first person who sees the news for the next day, because that's
Mhm.
how it worked before, we had the internet. And him just sort of, like, he just stands out there and sells the news to people, and, grapples with it in everything from, like, letting the kid reading the or letting the kid reading the Black Freighter comic, just being like, no, take that for free when he sees the Soviets have invaded Afghanistan, because it's like, oh, this is a it doesn't nothing matters anymore,
He gives him
to
his hat
yeah.
too.
And
It's
then,
so
sort
cute.
of later trying to rationalize, like, oh, well, we should definitely just, like, wipe them out first, right? Like, morally it makes sense, like, even if their women and children die, morally it makes sense to do that to protect our women and children, like,
Mhm.
just the ways that he tries to rationalize it, I think, are.
Yeah, and like a guy who's saying stuff like that, where like I don't agree with it, but he's still like a character I really connected with
Well,
and
it's
really
also,
like.
that's how people rationalize things like that. Most world events, and I mean, this
Mhm.
is also, like, a big theme of Watchmen, is that most of what happens is out of the hands of normal people.
Mhm.
Like,
Yep.
and again, one of the things that contrasts it with superhero comics, right? In a superhero comic, you can put on a green hat and a green frilly costume and pick up a bow and arrow, and you can call yourself Green Arrow and stop the worst injustices of the world,
Mhm.
right? But you know, no matter how hard they try and how close they get, like, Rorschach and Night Owl can't do that. They don't have. It's amazing, like, how, like, when you get to the conclusion of Watchmen, you realize how little agency they had the whole time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's important that the rug pull is only at the very end, because, it's not much of a story if you think that it's not much of a story if you're Doctor Manhattan and perceiving it all at the same time, but
Mhm.
um you when you go back and reread it knowing how it ends, it's like, yeah, this, like, what they're doing is not actually going to stop the the is not actually going to stop Ozymandias's plan at the end of the day,
Yeah.
no
Can
matter how hard they try.
can
And
I say just on the topic of like tertiary characters, that even though I don't like where the writing goes for this character, that I fully stan Joey the lesbian car cab driver.
She gets dealt a bad
I
card at the end.
don't like the way that that plot line is resolved. I think that it's bad and bad writing. But up until that last bit, I actually fully love Joey the lesbian cab driver.
Yeah, she's great, and that turn at the end is just like, Okay, so she
It's
starts
very
beating up her
weird
girlfriend?
and mostly in service of like a different character's
Yeah.
like actualization.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, it is happening. Like that scene happens like in concert with the sort of psychic attack from
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
the
yeah.
monster. So
But
it's
it's
not
like
like
the
it's not like those characters aren't. They're not acting normally, I guess.
Sure.
But
yeah. So I don't know. Speaking of characters, we are called, crying in the book club. Which Watchmen character do you guys think cries the most?
Cries the most.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Who's the
it
saddest
I mean, I feel
Watchmen
like
character?
Lori cries the most, like
so
just categorically.
Lori. So yeah, Silk Spectre definitely cries the most in the comic.
Yeah.
Like in terms of seeing people crying on the page, it's definitely her.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's what I meant.
And but I think that in terms of like actual like including all the off-screen crying, it's definitely Night Owl.
Yeah, I wrote him
Oh,
down.
100%. He
He's
cries so much off screen.
Yeah, because I think we like in the Silk Spectre's story here is like it's ultimately leading like to the end, which is when she has this like big breakdown because she realizes the basically her whole world is shattered by the revelation, but by the fact that Dr. Manhattan is totally indifferent to her, and B, the revelation that the comedian is her father.
Yeah.
And so like when we see her crying at the end, it's like it's all of the pent up emotions from like being
Yeah.
forced to be the Silk Spectre, coming to hate the comedian, you know, sort of externally hating being a superhero, but
Yeah.
internally actually kind of enjoying it and missing it
Yeah.
and resenting the fact that it was taken away from her, and also now resenting the fact that like her budding relationship with Night Owl seemingly has been taken away from her. So like that all the culmination there is the culmination of her just letting everything out. I think before that she probably didn't cry very much because she's
No.
she's a very like 80.
Well, they've
like,
all been repressing a lot.
yeah, but I think
Oh, yeah.
Night Owl represses it the least. Like as Silk Spectre says, he is a very repressed man.
But
But
he's
I think
also got a lot of privilege.
I think he cries himself to sleep most nights, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Definitely
think
before.
Rorschach never cries.
No.
No.
Well, not anymore. As a kid he did.
As a kid, he did, but
Oh, yeah.
after that, never
And
again.
I think also like just the relationship between a Night Owl and Hollis Mason, where in the book and to Hollis, it's like oh man, like why are you still coming out? I'm an old man. Like you shouldn't come see me. Like you're a young guy. You got lots of friends and stuff to do. But really, like Dan needs Hollis so much in those times he goes to them. He's like his only
Yeah.
human connection.
They
And I don't think Hollis
absolutely
knows
need
it.
each other.
Yeah. And then he gets murdered.
Yeah.
Hollis. Couldn't have happened to a nicer man.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I mean, really, like Night Owl is in a lot of ways is the emotional center of the book, right? Like he's the one who, I mean, Rorschach, unless you're a kind of weird little psycho freak, is not really a particularly relatable character.
Yeah.
And despite being, a frequent POV character, but Night Owl is the character who is the most. I guess empathetic is probably the word that I'm looking for here. I was gonna say something else that didn't quite make sense, but I think he's certainly the most empathetic in the sense that like he's the one who is constantly extending this like sort of hand of friendship to Rorschach.
Yeah.
He's the one who is like he's ultimately the one who like kind of breaks out of his like sort of malaise of post superheroics life when he tells Silk Spectre like, oh yeah, you can stay with me.
Yeah.
He's the first one to like have some degree of like actualization within the plot of the comic, right? And eventually I think the other characters get that, but he's the one who I think is the my reading of this is that he's the one that the readers are sort of meant to latch
I mean,
onto as
he's like
the
he's like consistent too. He's
yeah,
not a
yeah,
character of high extremes. As much as you cannot be a character of high extremes when this is happening, in your life and everything. But yeah, what about good old Doctor Manhattan, who we haven't really talked about? I really
Dr.
like
Manhattan's a dick.
he is, but like
he's also absolutely the most tragic character in Watchmen.
he is, and that his origin story that's told, and I really like how they introduce the characters first a lot of the time, and then pull it back and like give snippets of their life either through the prose or actual issues, like the clockmaker's was it clockmaker's son, is that what the chapter's
Yeah,
called?
Clockmaker's son is
Which
Yeah.
is just such
Dr.
a
Manhattan
such a
issue.
good issue where you learn that he's a kid whose dad was a watchmaker. He wanted to be a watchmaker, and then his dad learned about the atom bomb and was like, oh, this is no longer your life. He became a physicist, met a girl he liked, and then accident, boom, Dr. Manhattan. It's just
Yeah,
like,
And then
and
met a
that's
child
all.
he liked.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And that's all. Like that origin story is a very classic like superhero origin story. It's like,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
guy has an accident and gets superpowers, and that's not even the part that I mean when I'm talking about like the great tragedy of Doctor Manhattan. Really is that like and they do such a good job of like getting across the way that he perceives things that are happening,
Mm-hmm.
which is just so brutal to sort of understand, because you meet him early on and it's like, oh, he's just like, he's an asshole, he hates Silk Spectre, um like he's emotionally abusive, like
I
he's
don't
just a,
I feel like hate is a strong word.
well, maybe not, okay, yeah, hate is a strong word, but he's definitely like,
Hate is
you
a
know,
strong word, but he
He's
really,
definitely
really, really
disconnected.
doesn't care about her.
yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah, and he seems to have that same sort of, he has that same sort of like apathy towards most other people,
Yeah.
He seems
and it's like,
arrogant, and it's like
oh,
not his fault. It's like,
yeah, it's like, oh, this is just a guy who like got superpowers and it went to his head because he's super
mhm,
powerful, and then you realize sort of over the course of that issue that he, is, he's just incapable, he can't perceive reality in that way anymore,
Yeah.
mhm,
and it's such a, I think that like it's I personally think that it's a, his is the most tragic story here, like that he had his humanity ripped away from him to the point where he literally has to be convinced that there's any value to life and being human,
I
mhm.
don't
um
disagree. Like I like they're on the one hand, like when I do think about Dr. Manhattan, I'm like, you're just kind of a dick and like you like say that you care about people, but you end up like forgetting about that as well. Like you can't even remember that Lori needs to breathe on Mars.
right,
Mhm.
Like
but you
I'm willing to admit that part of that is like, it's not like it's his fault. Like he's not actively making the choice to be the way that he is, but at the same time that doesn't make it any less frustrating.
No,
Sure.
yeah, he's definitely frustrating. It's frustrating, and he's not particularly like, it's hard to empathize with him, that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not like his sort of like apathy isn't like, it's not callous or malicious.
And
It's just that
I
like he
honestly
has,
I felt like I probably felt more like sympathy for Dr. Manhattan when I was a younger person reading this book than I do now.
Mm.
yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, just
but
for a
he's,
variety of reasons, and I'm willing to admit that that's also just like personal bias.
Sure.
yeah, sure. He's also just like, but he's also, I mean, like Rorschach and Night Owl, he's totally been stripped of his autonomy. The difference is
Yeah.
that like he knows it. Like he knows that like there's nothing he can do that will change the outcome. And what would like, how would you respond to that in any way other than his sort of like nihilism?
Yeah.
Uh,
And especially
Yeah,
since
I
he's
mean, I
like
can't
the
even
most powerful
imagine.
being on the planet, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, he's so powerful and everything." He's just like caught in a reality where his decisions don't matter because they're already pre-made in his mind.
Yeah.
yeah.
He's
And
good.
and obviously that changes at the end. At the end, he has an epiphany and he goes and creates the New 52.
We'll get to that. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Boy, oh boy. Actually, the end of Doomsday Clock. Oh,
Oh, we're not
Um,
gonna.
we're
We're not
yeah.
gonna.
I'll give you guys the light on it. But
I mean,
hmm?
oh, go ahead.
No, just and then what was I gonna say? So yeah, like with Watchmen, it's we've said it a lot, but it's like 12 issues. It creates this world that feels huge, and it feels it's got a past, it's got a present. It's
Hmm.
at the end, it does have a future. We're not sure where it's gonna go, and there's stories to be told.
No,
So well, there are stories that are happening, whether they're gonna be told or not. You know, is a separate thing. But it's a universe that feels like lived in, and that it will be lived in, which is cool. And that has led to a lot of Watchmen spin-offs. There's the movie, which me and Emily both watched today. Me
Yeah.
for the first time.
Alex, you watched the whole movie.
Yeah.
How did you feel about it?
Like from a plot perspective, it was cool to read the graphic novel, and I finished that like last week, and then watch the movie, and it's like, yep, they're going
The
through it.
movie sucks,
They're going
Alex.
through. It's terrible, and the switch at the end. This doesn't make any fucking sense. No,
Okay,
no
well,
sense.
hold on. I don't like the movie ending, but I also feel like if you're trying to kind of pare down the story for a movie, it makes a little more sense to just try to blame it on Dr. Manhattan than it does to make
Yeah,
a big squid.
but my issue with that is like Doctor Manhattan is an American asset, so like I don't know if that would unite the world that the U.S. got
Well, the
destroyed by
idea
their
is
own
like
asset.
Dr. Manhattan is going rogue, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, but I think it'd get a little less sympathy where it's like, hey, you held this gun over our heads for so many years, and now it blew up
Sure.
on you. Whereas
And
like
I mean,
the
I don't want
alien from space is like, oh my gosh.
I mean, like as it stands, I don't feel like the plan would have worked. I don't feel like the actual like coming together would have actually happened.
I mean
Based and I mean that's the point of Watchmen the comic.
that's the ending, right? Is that like
Yeah.
the ending is that Rorschach's journal gets run in the Frontiersman and the whole thing falls apart.
Well, I mean
You
Well,
know,
the
like
it's open to interpretation whether
in
people take that seriously or not, though,
the
right? Like,
the comic you can kind of take it more in an either or, but like the movie just sort of like kind of hand waves like the printing of Watchman's journal or the printing of Rorschach's journal does like happen, but it's not like it's just sort of part of the ending. It's not necessarily like whether or not it like changes any sort of tide
mhm, yeah,
for just for the movie, which I
yeah, I
guess
mean it's not in the comic either, but I do read the ending of the comic as this is something that is good because there were
oh
people who
yeah.
read the Frontiersman and took it like
No,
and took it seriously.
and I think that the comic does sort of like there is a better case for that in the
Yeah,
comic.
yeah. Which actually, I mean, bad movie. Well, let me just say, I think we and Emily both
Yeah,
said
it
that.
sucks.
But I did read Doomsday Clock. I won't talk about it a lot, but that is where Doomsday Clock picks up, where like, hey, this was published in the New Frontiersman, and people are coming for Adrian, and the nukes are back in play. That all happens, and anyway, Ozymandias, he hops worlds and goes to the DC universe, and Doctor Manhattan's hiding there because he created DC Comics Rebirth, and he was the reason. It's funny because in a meta way, I kind of like this, but not actually, because the way they explained it is that Doctor Manhattan was hiding in the DC universe and making it edgy, gritty, got rid of relationships, basically created a New 52, but also like before that too, where he made these stories in a way. he is the epitome of people reading Watchmen and taking the grimdark and writing about them, which is what happened, in a lot of DC comics after Watchmen, where people got the wrong message, in my opinion, where it's like, hey, well, we'll just put some ultra violence in there, and we'll make these dark characters who don't love anyone or anything. That's
We got the
Watchmen for you.
killing joke out of it.
We got one good thing, but again, Alan Moore. So so it was kind of funny that in Doomsday Clock, like the actual legitimate explanation of why, like, hey, the Justice Society isn't around, the Legion of Superheroes isn't there, is because Dr. Manhattan and Watchmen got rid of them. And then at the end, it's Superman who inspires Dr. Manhattan the same way that Laurie inspires him, in the actual book. And it ends with them all coming back for DC Comics. Yeah. You know what? Reading those two close together really, even me, just makes me feel sick. It's just like, oh man, just bad, just bad. Doomsday Clock's
Nobody
bad.
asked you to read that,
And I know I was
told you not to.
Jean-Luc fought back a few times, like, no, please don't. But I read it, and I'm glad I did, because it is really taking that thing where, like, Watchmen is this great world. It's got a lot of stuff, and none of the stories that have been told expanding it have even come close to the original, which is, when you don't have the team that did it telling the story, another story, if they even want to tell a story, which, hey, why would you need to tell another story? Watchmen's fucking one of the 100 greatest novels of all time, according to Time magazine. So, yeah, I don't know. What else is there? There was before Watchmen, which I remember reading the Silk Spectre miniseries, and I thought it was pretty good, but that was
I didn't read any of the before Watchmen.
I think that if we had more time, I would love to talk about Darwin Cook's fascination with Watchmen, and how he, like, basically tries to, like, I wish that I wish that we could have done, like, talked about how the New Frontier is structurally exactly the same as Watchmen.
Yeah.
And it's Darwin, and I love the New Frontier. The New Frontier is literally up there with Watchmen in terms of, like, one of my favorite comics. But it is, like, Darwin Cook trying so hard to be like, no, guys, please, I'm begging you not to just keep doing Watchmen over and over and over. Like, right down to, like, Wonder Woman is about to, like, do, like, some horrific act of like the Wonder Woman Superman in Vietnam scene literally mirrors the, like, the comedian Dr. Manhattan scene where, instead of the comedian shooting his pregnant mistress in the head, Wonder Woman frees a bunch of, like, captured Vietnamese women and leads them to kill a bunch of soldiers. Like, it literally, it's like literally, it's just, and you see it so much in stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I would love, I could, if I had time to, like, if I had, like, gone through and reread New Frontier and also, like, Darwin Cook's Silk Spectre, I would have loved to, like, really talk about the the connections there, but
neither here nor there.
And Darwin Cook really was like, okay, we're gonna put Watchmen in continuity, but we'll call it the New Frontier. Here we go. So, fantastic work too. So again, this is a gun to your head situation, and you can't pull the trigger, Jean-Luc. But if after reading just Watchmen, what part of it would you like to see explored? And maybe explored by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, even. Like, let's say they're the ones steering the ship. What would you like to see them
that's the
do?
thing that isn't compelling to me, because, like, I love Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons as creators. Like, I think both of them, obviously, I love Watchmen. I love work that they've done since then, independent of one another. And I want to, hopefully end off on talking about some, like, technical stuff in Watchmen that I really like. Like craft level stuff, but, like, it's not a compelling question to me, because, like, the intent of, Watchmen is that it is a 12 issue story. It is a self-contained story. That's it. Hands off,
Okay,
dust the hands clean, let it go.
I actually didn't read my question properly. It's if you had to do it. Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons, they hate you. They're like, Jean-Luc, please don't do anything else with Watchmen. But you're like, I got the DC money, kid. And now you're writing something. So where are you going? What are you exploring? What characters are you doing?
Like I said, I think I'm pulling the trigger.
You can't. I'm sorry. There's no gun.
Oh God, that's tough. I mean, I think I honestly think that like what I'm doing is probably before Watchmen, but
Hmm.
not, but good. Like I think like there's no to me there's no other compelling answer to this question, because I think the future of this universe, like it is not compelling to ask the question what happens in Watchmen after the end of Watchmen. um but I think you could, if you wanted to tell a compelling story about the Minutemen, or you could tell the story that is constantly alluded to of Rorschach and Night Owl taking down the criminal underbelly. Those are the stories that I
Yeah.
think there you could find value in telling if you were doing it for a reason other than a cynical cash grab.
Yeah.
So I think that there are things there. You could also do like a really sicko, like hard, like right wing, early 2000s Frank Miller comedian thing that I think could be fun. Like you could do like the Batman Reptilian for the
Sure.
comedian.
Sure. I think it's
But
funny that you had a gun to your head a second ago, and now you're like, I got 2 ideas. Maybe I got more. So I like that.
I mean, it's not that I don't. It's not that there aren't things that like. It's not that I hate the idea of expounding on the characters in the universe of Watchmen.
Yeah.
It's that every attempt at doing so has been nothing but a cynical attempt to cash in on on its name.
Yeah, it's become a franchise, so which is hard.
Yeah,
But
and I would
Emily,
rather
Yeah.
If I could, Dr. Manhattan laser out all of everything Watchmen related after the book, I would do that.
heck yeah.
And it has nothing to do with the quality of the individual, like, TV shows or comics, or even though they all suck. It just happens that they all suck. Like some of, even if some of them had been good, I would believe the same thing.
Yeah.
Sure. Where would you go, Emily?
I mean, like, obviously, like, this is not gonna surprise anybody, but, like, I would do, like, a mini series about, like, Minutemen era Silhouette. Like,
Oh, of course, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just, like, no question. I knew that this question was coming, and that was gonna be my answer. Like,
Yeah.
I want to know about the lesbian. Come on.
Tell us.
And I haven't read any of the like ancillary material for Watchmen, so I have no
Mhm.
idea if they.
I think there's a Silhouette mini.
Yeah, I had
be
a
wrong.
feeling that there was probably some sort of
Yeah.
like one issue or something.
It's one of those things that the Zack Snyder film, it sort of shows like all the heroes of the Minutemen, the ones that die, it shows them dying in like the intro, and it's like really long and really bad. But it's
And
like
hers
shorter.
is by far the most brutal.
Okay, I will
Oh,
say
yeah.
though that like her doing the kiss is like iconic. Like
Oh yeah.
like absolutely groundbreaking, meant a lot to me as a like a tiny queer child. Like absolutely incredible.
Okay, we say one nice thing about the Zack
But
Snyder
that
film,
movie
but that is it.
sucks, and
It
the
does.
rest of the way that they handle that character also sucks.
Yeah, for me, it would probably be just a Black Freighter comic book. So like, you don't even have to talk about
Yeah.
Watchmen, but like, I don't know, it's kind of like I kind of like that horror comic where it's like,
Hey,
oh no.
so I ordered dinner because I thought we were gonna be done. I'm gonna have to go grab it, and then I will be right back.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
I feel like that's cheating, Alex.
Well, you'll never know.
Like if your answer to, I mean, I guess like if you wanted one part of the Watchmen universe to be expounded on,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily disagree that like the fictional comics are interesting. That doesn't feel in the spirit of the question, but it's a good answer.
Well, as the
Tom
spirit
King
maker,
tried to do that.
Did he?
Isn't that what the Rorschach mini is about? Well,
I didn't make it long enough.
it's not the Black Freighter
Well,
literally, but
Rorschach is
it's
like,
about the writer of the Black Freighter, right? Like
yeah, but
that's the
it
mystery
like
they're
takes
trying to
place
solve.
after, yeah,
Yeah.
again, so like in a way it's like, hey, Tom King is writing a Watchmen where there's a murder mystery that's like cool. Too bad it's boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On a
Craft level.
huh?
Craft level?
I was gonna on a more positive note.
Yes.
There's just some craft stuff in this book that is really good. I really want to talk about Alan Moore's prose. For people, for the 3 people who listened to the comics podcast, you'll know that one of the things that we would harp on a lot is comic books being, especially superhero comics, being really overwritten and really over reliant on narration and prose. But the problem often was that it was not very good. And there is such a rhythm to the prose here, and the way that it's presented. Like there is a lot of there's a lot of dialogue. I think there's probably more dialogue at the end of the day, but the prose that you're getting, you get Rorschach's journal, you get Dr. Manhattan's like explaining what, going through time. You get the psychiatrist's internal monologue, his like memos that he's writing himself, and you get it from all these different characters, and each one of those internal monologues, each one of those pieces of prose takes on a different tone. That it does, like it does tell you a lot about the interiority of the characters, but also each of those different like parts of the story like rhythmically just fit into the comic. And I think it's a testament to like how closely Moore and Gibbons worked on the book, to the point where like literally like they would like Moore would go over to Gibbons' house and like look at the panel layouts and Gibbons would be like, there's too much text in your script here, can we do something? And we'd be like, yeah, we can cut it, and there's a rhythm to that, to the storytelling, and to the way that that monologue is placed, and the way that all the dialogue is placed. And a lot of it comes down to the 9-panel grids, which at the time were unheard of, because it was, comics were about these big splashy images, like, you have these big double page spreads, or, big full page like poses. You didn't have these 9-panel grids, and I'm, I'm on a record. I really like it when comics break the structure of just like gridding every page.
But it's it's different when you're when you're just copying Watchmen for the sake of copying Watchmen. You're like, hey,
sure,
I've got 9-panel grids, therefore it's art. Like,
yeah, right. Therefore, it's serious.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Andrea Sorrentino is probably my favorite artist working right now, and that's a guy who like takes a fucking sledgehammer to every 9-panel grid he sees.
Oh yeah.
But there's something that like in Watchmen, because it sticks to the structure so religiously. I think it has this really potent effect of like feeling really claustrophobic, and like the characters are boxed in.
Absolutely.
Like basically from the beginning, like they exist in these small snippets, and that is a really effective tool.
Yeah.
But also, and I mean, this is the great thing, is that, the best part about rules is that you can break them. And so there's nothing here that like, there's no page here where there's like, there's no page here that has like, an ovular shaped panel or whatever. It all exists in these grids, but it's the merging of those panels that, when you break structure, it's like, oh, this is something that is like, this is important, when the best example, I mean, there's a lot of great examples of this, but the best example is the last issue opening on, I think it's 5 pages that are just all the full page spreads of the tentacles in New York City that don't even give you the full scope of what's happened. Like, you just are assaulted with these big images, and it's so different from what you see before that it conveys such a sense of scale to to what's happened, to what Ozymandias has done. And that happens like at a bunch of different spots throughout the book. When you have a panel layout that's a 3-panel grid, three panels at the top, 3 panels at the bottom, and then like, two panels and then two panels in the middle, like like the two panels on the left merge and the panel on the right, still on its own, and it shows you like it's like extending the shot of like this is pay attention to this is important. And I love like when the sort of proverbial camera zooms out and how that gets used in the comic is such an important part of the storytelling that I think like and there are some cases where like there are some cases in contemporary comics where like this had this similar to contemporary creators have employed similar techniques for sure. I'm not to take away from them, but there is something unique about the way that or at least it feels unique about the way that it's stuff that's like missable, and that's part of what makes it so incredible, is that it's not like trying to like draw your eyes to it and be like, this is so important, it's super important.
It feels like Watchmen, like no matter what corner you turn, like Moore and Gibbons give us 12 issues, 27 pages I think an issue. There might be a couple oversized ones in there, but it feels like if this was a film and if you turn the camera, there would be so much more there. And it feels like a world where like it's so 360 degrees. It feels so lived in, and that's part of what makes the whole like, hey, it's got such a rich history around it, and there's so much to explore in it, and it feels like a real universe with continuity and everything, because it feels so real, because the details are there, but also like the macro things are there.
I mean, I could sit here and talk about. I love talking about Watchmen. I could talk about Watchmen for another 2 hours. I don't know if you guys want to listen, or if anyone wants to, hear me talk about Watchmen for another 2 hours.
We said this. We said that this podcast would be 10 minutes long, and I was lied to. So,
I'm sorry.
I will say, just sort of speaking on like Watchmen related media. I actually watched the first episode of the Watchmen motion comic.
Oh.
So what does that entail?
I would love to tell you about it, because actually I really like the Watchmen motion comic.
It's actually cool.
It's actually very cool. I kind of expected it to be more of a I expected it to be more of like a slideshow-ish of like panels from the comic with like narration, but actually it's got like a lot of, it's like actually animated.
Yeah,
like,
I was surprised earlier. I meant to chime in when you guys were talking about this earlier, but this was a big deal when it came. I remember this being a big deal when it came out.
I was not aware of it until recently.
Is it voiced, or is it like
it's voiced? Yeah.
It's like one guy doing the like.
So
it's an audiobook.
Yeah, it's audiobook style. So I feel like if this had been like fully voice acted, that this would be like the definitive adaptation of Watchmen.
Yeah,
honestly.
Interesting.
I mean, there's music and everything.
Yeah, like it's like, I mean, it's the animation I would kind of describe as being sort of like, it's similar to like Flash animation in like the movement, but like it's really well executed, and like
And is it go panel, like does it?
I mean, it is
I think I've done something.
Like, it is fully an adaptation of Watchmen the comic.
Everything that is in Watchmen the comic is in Watchmen. Like it is literally, they just animated each panel and transitioned.
Because I remember something on like I don't know, a few years ago I read on Comixology, but it was something where like there was like movement to it, but it literally went like panel to panel. So is this
that's
panel to panel?
Comixology guided view, which is
that's guided view.
So does it panel to panel, or is it like a seamless?
No,
like,
this
next,
is like
next.
It's like scenes. Like honestly, like Alex, you should really at least like watch a little bit of it after this, like at some point,
I'm happy to hear that it's not like
I genuinely like. I got to the end of the first episode, and even like knowing how Watchmen goes and like having read it recently, I like wanted to watch the next episode, but we were gonna have to record soon, so I didn't.
Yeah, I don't know if this is still the case, since apparently it's on HBO Max now, but at one point the whole thing was on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Um,
I'm sure I can find it online.
I mean,
it
it's
shouldn't be too hard to
definitely
find.
on HBO Max, so it is
Yeah.
probably online. It's like 12
Yeah.
episodes because
I'm
it's
also
like an episode per issue.
Yeah, I'm also trying to remember. There was something about the release of this that was interesting, but or at least I remember there being something about the release of this that was interesting that I read about like years ago, but I can't remember what it is now, and I can't find it. So,
Hmm.
I want to say that it was like they included it as like a bonus feature on like the like DC animated movies or something. Like,
Huh.
I don't know
I
that
would
that's
believe
true, but
that
like
in
they just like
some capacity.
yeah, there was like something weird about the way that it came out, but I
Yeah.
could be wrong about that. I could be conflating it with something else.
Well, I hear a sound in the distance, a little a little bell chiming, which means that we've reached. We're called Crying in the Book Club, so this is our sad space. The part of the show where we say something sad. Well, something that brought us to tears
Just
in
say
this week.
something sad.
Say something sad. Poverty.
Anything
Yeah,
sad.
let's go undefeated. No, it's like it's inspired by our good friends Chad and Cameron at Opinions Are Cheap. They have their glad space, but we're more emotional than glad. So glad is an emotion, but sad space. So what did you guys feel sad about this week? Or get tears from this week? I'd go first.
I would love to hear what has made you sad.
I know what made him sad. It's actually sad.
Yeah. I decided to kick it off with a real sad one.
Oh.
Because my cat Kiara, after 20
Oh.
years, she sadly passed away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she lived 20 years, and I remember, I think it was like Christmas time. We've had multiple like near death scares, so it's one of those things where it's like, is she gonna live forever? But she is not. But she is buried in the backyard. So if anyone
Nice.
wants to reincarnate a la Afterlife with Archie, give me a shout. But yeah, she's a good cat.
It's very telling that your touchstone there is Afterlife with Archie and not Pet Cemetery.
Well, it's not a full cemetery. It's just it's just one. So, but yeah, I'll always love Kiara, cute cat, and they did a really nice. The vet came in to like do it at the home, so we didn't have to like drive her out.
Aw.
So that's my sad space.
That is a very sad space.
Yay!
Emily, do you have one?
I mean, kind of. It feels it feels a little it feels a little dumb in comparison to like an actual animal death. But I mean, I watched the season finale of Our Flag Means Death on HBO, and it was
Nice.
very sad, and it made me sad enough to want to cry. So that's my sad space.
It's a good sad space, Jean-Luc.
I, wow, I should have come prepared. I'm gonna do something really lame and say I saw, which this is gonna be outdated by the time this episode comes out.
Sure.
No one knows.
I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh,
and
I'm seeing
cool.
that literally in 2 days. I am seeing that it's my birthday in a couple of
Yay!
days. So I am making my wife go see that with me.
Nice. Well, don't let anything that I say color your expectations.
I know
because
that you didn't
I was
enjoy
really,
it.
I was really excited for it. I thought it looked fantastic, and it came out, and I like wasn't able to go see it like when it came out. It's been out in theater. It's actually its theater run is expanded, which is cool. I'm not gonna be mad about and a smaller movie getting a theater expansion. We should have more of that. But I was really bummed that I did not. Which God, this sounds so lame. But I was really bummed that I just didn't really care for it. I really wish that I had liked that movie.
Well, yeah. I mean, movies are very
but
important.
you know what?
To you,
I feel like it is a perfectly normal reaction to be excited for a movie and then it not be as good as you thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well, the good news is tomorrow or at 3 months ago, depending on when this episode
You don't
comes
have to
out.
talk about it. Oh,
No, we're doing. I mean, this is intentional.
Yeah.
I'm going to see the Northman, so
I'm
hopefully,
very excited for that, and I know you're excited for. I mean, a lot of reasons. The Anya Taylor-Joy of it all.
I am also very excited for the
I love
Northman.
that it's
Robert Egger.
I'm just so glad that finally they're putting fascist movies back in theaters.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our first episode. Thank you, Chad.
Lots of people are. It's just a dig at all the idiots who are like, "Oh, it's Norse mythology. It's a Norse movie. It's only Nazis like the Norse stuff."
Yeah,
that also makes me cry seeing that.
Sorry. You can only be sad about one thing per episode.
That level of media literacy.
Yeah, my goal is to have a happy cry next time, but we'll see how that goes. But that brings us.
You called it a sad space. If we stuck to the original idea,
sad and glad rhyme,
which was cry space, I would have said something that made me cry because I was happy about it. But instead,
it's called the sad space. Maybe we'll call it a cry space next time. We'll talk
next
about this.
Next time it'll be a cry space.
Yeah, people have voted.
We don't need to air our podcast planning stuff out to the public.
Yeah, that's for our Patreon subscribers. But anyway, Thank you for stopping by and hearing us talk about Watchmen, which is a book that we all enjoyed, and I'm glad that we got to talk about one of the greatest graphic novels of all time on our first episode.
Do you guys want to reveal what our second episode's going to be about?
I gotta say, it's like, good luck to whatever follows up, but from what I've heard about this one and all the things, it is Scott Pilgrim vs. The World by Mr. Brian Lee O'Malley, who you might know from Snot Girl. So,
yeah, his much more famous work.
Yeah, his Snot Girl. Hey, if they released more issues, I'd be a happier person, but I'm not. So that'll be the next episode released.
I'm very excited.
This is a bi-weekly show, so if you're coming next week for an episode, you're gonna have to listen to this one again. Sorry, them the rules. But yeah, Emily, Jean-Luc, thank you for letting me host this first episode. We're going to be rotating as we go on.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to be doing this show with you guys.
Yeah, I'm happy to be able to put podcaster back in my Twitter bio.
Yeah, it was a rough time. But you can check us out on Twitter. You can check us out on Twitter. And our goal is to tweet more in the first 2 months than the comics podcast ever did. That's our goal. Yes. We'll see if it comes up.
But it will. You should follow it. Twitter. It's at Crying Book Club. Crying in the Book Club, I believe, was taken. But at Crying Book Club is our Twitter handle.
Yeah.
Obviously, we will post links to our episodes there, and cringe.
Yeah,
we will post cringe.
You could find Mr. Jean-Luc on Twitter. It was funny, we used to not know where he was at. He wouldn't reveal it, but in the last 100 episodes of the Comics Podcast, he did. So you will know that he is Mountain Dew Liker, MT Dew Liker, and you can find it on Letterboxd. Are you uploading again? I mean, you have such a vast stockpile of great Letterboxd reviews that there's stuff for people to find, but is that something you're getting back into?
I'm mostly I log everything that I see on Letterboxd, so you can go see my star ratings, and if you have questions, if there's not a review attached to them, which there normally isn't, you can ask me about it. I don't know. You can
write more reviews, John.
Put Jean-Luc to work, please.
You can ask me why I gave Everything Everywhere All at Once 2.5 stars, and I gave Ambulance 4 stars.
I will ask you this after I see it.
Oh wow! We buried the lead. We should scrap this episode and just tell
I actually do want to hear about Ambulance, but that's neither here nor there.
But again, that's a Patreon exclusive thing. Emily, Twitter is at mpandanata. Her Letterboxd also at Pandabor. Are you updating your Letterboxd there?
I do. I mean, I upload Letterboxd whenever I watch a movie, so
heck yeah.
That's not true.
It's mostly
true. The Watchmen today?
No, I didn't. I did not put Watchmen up there, but I mean, I'm planning on doing it after. No, I just forgot to do it when I watched it earlier today.
Damn.
No,
damn.
I am planning on doing it after we finish recording this.
Awesome. And podcasts, this is not the only one where you can find Emily at. You can listen to Imagine Me in Utah, Fresh Podcast Market, which I listened to an episode for the first time today.
Wow!
I liked it, and I want another episode, so I'm now an annoying fan.
I want to be. I want to guest on. I need to guest on that show. I was promised a guest slot 4 years ago.
No, I mean, like, guest slot's always open. And I have a new podcast that I think should have its first episode out by the time this goes up, called
that looks terrible.
That Looks Terrible.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, wow. So check that out. We'll talk about it also when it comes out, although it might already be out by the time you listen to this podcast. And of course, check out Emily on Twitch at Pandabor.
Yeah.
Doing some fun stuff. Your Ace Attorney.
I have been playing the Ace Attorney games.
A great series. A great game. And, you know, that reaches the end of a show. And if you thought this was our last episode, you should know that in the end, nothing ends. Is that the quote? That's not the quote. You are